Hi everyone, my name is Emma and I'm a Visitor Experience Assistant at Guelph Museums. Thanks for joining us for this week's Museum of You activity. This is a weekly series of videos where we imagine that people 100 years from now will want to see a museum exhibit all about you. Over these 6 weeks, I'll show you how to collect objects, stories, and pictures to help you make your very own museum exhibit. You can absolutely participate in today's activity without having done the previous week's activities. But this video series does all go together, so if you want to watch those videos, feel free to check them out on our Museums Everywhere portal. This is our last week before we put everything we've been collecting together to make your exhibit. So far, we've talked about artifacts, pictures, and stories. There's one more important type of thing that we collect here at the museum. Can you guess what that might be? I'm talking about documents. What's a document? It's any sort of recorded information. Usually, this means it's something that was written on a piece of paper. We all use documents all the time in our daily lives. Can you think of what kinds of documents you might use? How about books, notebooks, letters, birthday cards, emails, cookbooks, posters, signs, maps? Can you think of any others? Here at the museum, we have a big collection of documents which we keep in a special room called the archives. Documents can be fragile, so they're all stored very carefully in the archives. To help keep them safe, I'm going to show you some pictures of documents from the archives on the screen rather than physically holding them up. This is a diary from a man who lived over 100 years ago here in Guelph. At the museum, we love documents like this because they are full of information. He talks about what he does each day, and that tells us what normal life was like in Guelph at the time. This diary entry is particularly exciting. He wrote about the Titanic sinking. Here is what he wrote. Got paper. It is full of the terrible maritime disaster, the sinking of the Titanic, the largest steamer in the world. She struck an iceberg and went down in 2 hours. 866 saved by the Cunarder Carpathia, who picked them up from the lifeboats. 1,300 lost. This document here looks kind of boring. It's a directory of some of the businesses in Guelph, which isn't exactly exciting to read. But when we open it up, we can learn a lot about Guelph in the year 1948, over 70 years ago. In downtown Guelph today, there are lots of restaurants, cafes, and shops. But when this book was printed, some of the businesses downtown looked a little bit different. Here are 2 of the businesses that existed back then that are a little different from what you would see today. A Furrier, which is a company that sells animal furs that you can wear, and Love's Radio Service, which would fix people's radios. Television was still very new in Canada, and lots of people still only had radios for news and entertainment rather than a TV. On the back of this document, there's a list of emergency telephone numbers. Today, in an emergency, you would call 911. Back in 1948, you would have to dial 100 for the fire station, 123 for the police, and 67 or 114 for the hospital. And what else can this document tell us? Well, if you or your parents wanted to know how to find a business in Guelph today, what would you do? I know these days I would Google it. Do you think they had Google when this document existed? They didn't. They didn't even have the internet. If they did, they wouldn't have needed a guide like this. So that tells us just a little bit about life in the past. I'm going to tell you about one more type of document before we get to the activity that you'll do yourself. This is one of my all-time favorite types of documents, cookbooks. We have lots of old cookbooks here at the museum, and they're really fun to read because it helps us picture people in the past cooking, just like we do today. This is a page from a handwritten cookbook with a recipe for lemon pie. Look at the spatters on the page. Can you picture someone using this recipe and maybe making a bit of a mess as they did so? Here's another recipe. This recipe booklet was used during the Second World War and tells us something very important about the kinds of food that people ate during the war. At the time, Canada was shipping all of its wheat, which is what you use to make bread, to the soldiers fighting in the war. So they asked that everyone at home try to make bread that didn't have any wheat in it to make sure that there was lots to send to the soldiers. This little document here taught people how to make bread without wheat in it. Now, when we imagine people living in Canada during the Second World War, we know that one of the things that they did every day was eat bread that didn't taste at all like the kind of bread that they were used to eating, and we know that from this document. So we've seen a whole bunch of different types of documents, and we've seen how useful they are at telling us about life in the past. Now it's time to create your own document to put in your exhibit. Like I said earlier, it's really fun to look at old recipes so you know what people in the past ate. One recipe that we have from somewhere between 80 and 100 years ago was for something called complexion salad, which was supposed to help make your skin look better. It has spinach, carrots, onion juice, and gelatin in it, so it probably wobbled like jello when you ate it. That's really different from what a lot of us would eat today. What do you think people will eat 100 years from now? Will they still be eating meat? Will all of our food be grown in a laboratory? Will our food look like pills? And what do you think people 100 years from now will think about the food that we eat today? Your activity today is to think about your very favorite food. What could it tell someone 100 years from now about life in the year 2021? Is it homemade or is it from a restaurant? Does it have meat in it or is it vegetarian? Is it sweet? Is it spicy? Is it something that everyone in your family knows how to make? Do your friends eat the same kind of food? All of these questions tell us something about your life. So now it's your turn. Take a look at the worksheet posted on our Museums Everywhere page. It's also posted here with this video. You can write the recipe for your favorite food or have an adult write it for you, and then try to describe the food. Imagine that the person reading your description has never heard of this food before. If you want, you can draw a picture of the food instead of describing it, or even draw a picture with labels telling us what all the different parts are. Hopefully you'll get to make the food after and enjoy your favorite dish. Well, that's it. Hang on to your recipe sheet because next week we'll be using your recipe along with everything else that you collected over the past few weeks to help you make your Museum of You exhibit. If you haven't already, go back and do the other 4 Museum of You activities so that you'll be ready to make your exhibit next week. In the meantime, we'd love to see what recipe you choose to write down. Have an adult post a picture of your recipe and maybe even a picture of the food if you make it on social media and tag at Guelph Museums so we can see what you're making. Thanks so much for joining us today and see you again next week.